Before we begin, let me thank you for finding your way here. This channel is where stories of family, sacrifice, and redemption are told, not for fame, but so we might see ourselves in one another. If you'd like to walk further with us through these journeys, feel free to subscribe and keep these voices alive. Today's story is titled, "I Took the Blame for My Son Until the Truth Came Out in Court." It happened on a rain-slick road just past midnight, the kind of night when the world feels blurred at the edges. The streetlights were halos of mist. The wipers struggled, slapping back and forth against a windshield fogged with our breath. My son gripped the wheel too tightly, his knuckles white, his teenage heart racing faster than the speedometer. One moment, we were a mother and son driving home from a late-night practice. The next, headlights cut across our lane. A horn, a scream, the screech of tires that never found their grip. The world spun, metal shrieked, glass shattered. Then silence, except for the ragged sound of my boy's breath. He looked at me, his face pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. His lips trembled and words spilled out in fragments. "Mom, I didn't mean to, it just happened so fast." I touched his shoulder, steadying him, though my own body trembled. In that instant, with rain still beating on the roof like the ticking of some relentless clock, I saw the whole of his future laid out like fragile glass. College dreams, first loves, mistakes yet to be forgiven. The red and blue lights arrived quickly, painting the wet pavement with their judgment. An officer leaned down, his flashlight slicing into the car. Who was driving? My son's throat caught. His eyes darted toward me, wide and drowning in guilt. And before the silence could damn him, I spoke. I said. My voice was calm, steady, a stranger to the storm inside me. The words hung in the air heavier than the rain. The officer scribbled them into his notebook, and with that stroke of a pen, the burden shifted. It was no longer his accident, it was mine. Inside, though, I whispered a vow only a mother could make. "Son, your life is just beginning. Mine is already written in longer chapters. If someone must carry this weight, it will be me." And so, on that rain-drenched road, beneath the strobing lights of authority, I became both shield and sacrifice. Not because I was brave, but because he was my child. The morning after the accident smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. My son sat in the kitchen, shoulders hunched, spoon untouched in his cereal bowl. He looked smaller somehow, as if the crash had stolen an inch of his height. I kept moving, brewing coffee, straightening the already neat counter, anything to keep the silence from swallowing us whole. Then the phone rang. It was the insurance company, their voice brisk and metallic, as though spoken from a script. They wanted statements. They wanted forms. They wanted details precise down to the minute. I gave them mine, carefully, faithfully, each word shaping the official version of the night. 2 days later, a letter arrived, its words colder than the rain had been that night. Claim denied. Circumstances inconsistent. Liability in dispute. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands trembled not from shock, but from the realization that this was only the beginning. The other driver had filed, too. Their lawyer was already circling. The words civil lawsuit and damages floated like thunderclouds over our kitchen table. The numbers whispered in the documents were larger than anything we could afford. The thought of it tightened in my chest. Legal fees, settlements, maybe even losing the house. That week, the story leaked. First, a paragraph in the local paper. Careless mother causes late-night crash. Then a news segment with grainy footage of the crumpled car beneath the flashing lights. Authorities report woman at fault in dangerous collision. Neighbors began to speak in lowered voices. At the grocery store, I felt the glances, the small shake of a head as I passed. My reputation, built over decades of PTA meetings and Sunday potlucks, dissolved in a matter of hours. At home, my husband folded the paper with shaking hands. "You shouldn't have said you were driving," he muttered. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of a verdict. They're going to destroy us. Across the table, my son's eyes flicked up, red-rimmed, pleading. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Guilt sat on him like a second skin. I wanted to tell them both that it would pass, that storms always did. But the truth was simpler and harder. The real storm had only just begun. The walls of our house had always known laughter. They'd heard the thud of sneakers on the stairs, the clatter of late-night snacks raided from the fridge, the easy banter of a family that believed it could weather anything. But after the accident, the air grew heavy. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. My husband, David, was the first to show the fracture. He had always been steady, practical to a fault, the kind of man who balanced checkbooks by hand and insisted we carry an emergency fund for storms you can't predict. Now he looked at me with eyes rimmed in exhaustion and something worse, doubt. "You shouldn't have done it," he said one night, his voice a whisper so our son wouldn't hear from the next room. "You shouldn't have said you were driving." "I couldn't let them take his future away," I whispered back. "And what about ours?" His jaw tightened. "What about this house? Our savings? Do you think they won't come for everything once the lawsuit starts?" His words weren't cruel, they were scared. Still, they landed like stones in my chest. Our son Aaron carried his guilt differently. He moved through the house like a ghost, silent at dinner, doors closing softly behind him. His room smelled of anxiety, of unwashed laundry, and the tang of a boy trying to hold himself together. I would knock sometimes, just to check he was still breathing in there. "Hey, sweetheart," I'd say, opening the door a crack. He'd nod without looking up, headphones around his neck, textbooks spread but untouched. Once I caught his eyes in the glow of his laptop screen. They were rimmed with red, the way a child's are when nightmares wake them. "I should tell them the truth," he murmured one night when I lingered at his doorway. "No," I said, perhaps too sharply. Then softer. "You're 17, Aaron. This one mistake should not decide your entire life. Let me carry it." He stared at me for a long moment, then buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, and for a moment I thought he might cry. But when he lifted his head again, his face was a mask. The neighbors didn't help. I felt their stares at the mailbox, heard the hush in their voices when I entered the corner store. Once, in the frozen food aisle, I overheard a woman I'd known for 20 years whisper to her friend, "How careless can you be, driving like that at her age?" The words stung, not because they believed the lie, but because I had no defense. I had told it myself. At church, the pew behind us was empty for 2 Sundays in a row. People smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. The space between me and the community I once trusted grew wider every day. I tried to keep the house warm, to fill the silence with the hum of routine, cooking dinner, folding laundry, reminding Aaron about homework. But beneath it all, I felt the foundation shifting. My husband's worry, my son's guilt, the whispers outside our door, they pressed against me like water against glass. And I knew glass could only hold so much before it shattered. The first envelope came in a neat white sleeve, the kind you might mistake for junk mail if not for the heavy black print of a law firm's name in the corner. David found it in the mailbox and carried it inside like it was already loaded with explosives. He set it on the kitchen table without a word. I opened it. The pages were filled with language designed to wound: gross negligence, reckless endangerment, financial responsibility. Each word was sharp, as though typed not by ink but by the point of a knife. At the bottom was the demand, figures so large they blurred in my vision, commas and zeros tumbling like a storm I couldn't control. "They're suing us," I whispered, though both men in my life already knew. David's face tightened, and he reached for his glasses. He read each page carefully, his lips pressing thinner with every line. When he finished, he set the papers down, folded his hands, and looked at me as if weighing a sentence. "This isn't just a storm, Margaret," he said finally. "This is a flood. We hired a lawyer because we had no choice. Her name was Linda Carr, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tone, the kind of person who seemed built for courtrooms, not kitchens like ours. She arrived with a briefcase stuffed with files and a posture that made our dining chairs look too small for her. "First rule," she said, glancing between me and Aaron. "We don't lie to each other. I need the truth, all of it. Juries can smell deceit. If you were driving, we build the case around that. If he was," she nodded toward Aaron, "then I need to know before we drown in discovery." Aaron shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. I reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it once. "It was me," I said firmly. "I was driving." Linda studied me for a long moment, her pen tapping against her notepad. "Then understand what's ahead. The other side will tear your life apart looking for cracks. They'll dig through your medical records, your driving history, even your grocery receipts if they think it matters. They'll paint you careless, inattentive, maybe even unstable. Are you ready for that?" I nodded. My son's hand tightened in mine. What Linda didn't warn us about, what she couldn't warn us about, was the way the story would grow once it left the courtroom and entered the world of headlines. The local paper expanded its coverage, turning one brief report into a full article. "Mother of high school student blamed in late-night collision." They quoted sources familiar with the case, though none of those sources lived in my house. A photo appeared, me, hunched by the car, rain plastering my hair to my face. It was the kind of picture that spoke louder than truth, and it said exactly what they wanted: guilty, guilty, guilty. The television station followed. They ran footage of the twisted metal, then panned to our front porch. I hadn't even realized a camera crew had been outside until the 6 o'clock broadcast. The anchor, polished and calm, spoke of a tragic example of negligence. Negligence? I tried to keep the TV off, but neighbors mentioned it. At the pharmacy, someone I barely knew clucked her tongue as I walked by. At the gas station, a man muttered, "Ought to take her license away." At night, when the house was finally still, I sat by the window and stared out at the dark street. I thought about how quickly a life could tilt on its axis, not from the accident itself, but from the stories told afterward. Once a narrative is written, truth becomes a fragile thing, so easily drowned by repetition. David grew more silent with each day, retreating into spreadsheets and bills as if numbers could protect us. Aaron became restless, pacing the house, his guilt like a fire he couldn't put out. Twice I found him drafting emails, one to the paper, one to the law firm, both beginning with the same words. It wasn't my mother, it was me. I tore them up gently before he could send them. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "They're tearing you apart for something you didn't do." "I do understand," I answered softly. "And that's why I won't let them tear you apart instead." He shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears he refused to shed. "This isn't fair." Fair. The word tasted bitter. Life wasn't fair, but it was bearable, and sometimes that had to be enough. Still, as I lay awake listening to the creak of the house and the rain against the roof, I began to wonder if I had underestimated the storm. Love had given me the strength to step in front of the blow, but love alone might not be enough to hold the roof above our heads. The lawsuit had a timetable. The insurance had washed its hands, and the world outside our door had chosen its villain. And that villain was me. It began with a knock that wasn't really a knock at all, more a pounding, fists against wood in the early morning, when the dew was still clinging to the grass. David opened the door to find a microphone pushed into his face, a camera light blinding in the pale dawn. "Do you have any comment about the negligence claim, sir? Do you believe your wife should still be allowed to drive?" He shut the door before they could ask more, his jaw set tight, but the seed was planted. By lunchtime, there were 3 vans idling at the curb, their logos bright against the gray street. Reporters leaned on our fence like old friends, calling out my name whenever I dared to open a curtain. That night, my face filled the television screen. Not the face my family knew, soft and lined with years of care, but an image cropped from the rain-soaked chaos of that night. Hair matted to my cheeks, mouth open in shock, eyes wide as if I were confessing to something darker than a mistake. The anchor's voice was calm, practiced, and merciless. Local mother involved in late-night crash. Questions are rising about her capacity to drive safely. Capacity. They made it sound like a medical diagnosis, as if I were a danger simply for being alive at my age. At church the following Sunday, I felt the empty pews behind us like holes in the air. Friends who once embraced me now nodded politely, their smiles brittle, their eyes sliding away. In the grocery store, whispers moved faster than the carts. "That's her, the one who nearly killed that family." I had become what every community secretly needs, a vessel for blame, a symbol of carelessness, a what not to be for their children to point at. My private sacrifice was no longer private. I was the story. Aaron bore it worst of all. At 17, the world of high school is fragile enough without your mother's name running on the evening news. He stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, stopped answering texts. When his phone did buzz, the laughter on the other end was sharp enough to slice him. One evening, he came home pale and shaking, his backpack sliding off his shoulder to the floor. "They showed it in class, Mom. The news clip. Somebody pulled it up on their phone and everyone laughed, said you looked drunk." His voice cracked on the word and he turned away, fists clenched. I reached for him, but he pulled back, ashamed not of me, but of how powerless he felt. "Don't worry about them," I whispered, though the words felt weak. "Kids are cruel when they don't understand. But they do understand," he shot back, eyes wet. "They understand what the news is telling them, that you're the one who did it, and I can't even tell them the truth." He stormed up the stairs, the door slamming like a gavel, leaving me with the echo. David watched from the hallway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "We can't live like this," he muttered. "They've already convicted you, Margaret, before a judge ever will." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because he was right. In the court of public opinion, my trial had already begun, and no lawyer, no insurance policy, no carefully worded statement could rescue me from it. That night, long after the news vans left and the streetlights hummed, I stood at the window and whispered the vow again. Better me than him. Always me, never him. But as the words left my lips, I wondered how much longer I could keep them true. Before the weight of the world outside crushed the walls of the home, I was trying so desperately to protect. Hope arrived in the most ordinary way, on the front porch, wrapped in the scent of fresh-cut grass and old perfume. It was Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor from across the street. She was 80 if she was a day, with hair the color of powdered snow and a voice that could still cut through Sunday hymns. She leaned on her cane and looked at me with eyes sharper than any reporter's camera. "Margaret," she said, lowering her voice as though the bushes might be listening, "I don't believe a word of what they are saying." I wanted to thank her, but before I could, she added, "That night I was awake. My knees ache something awful in the rain, so I sit by the window. I heard it before the crash, the squeal of brakes, but not yours. It came from the other side of the street. That car was waiting, I swear it, like they wanted you to hit them." The words hung in the air, fragile and impossible. For days, I had carried the weight of guilt, the sting of headlines, the shame of whispers. Now, for the first time, there was something else, doubt, not about my son, not about me, but about them. I leaned against the doorframe, my breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Mrs. Callahan, are you sure?" "As sure as these old bones can be," she replied. "And I've still got the camera on my porch. My grandson set it up. Don't know if it caught much, but you're welcome to check." That night, Aaron and I walked across the street. His shoulders, once hunched with shame, straightened with every step. He carried a flash drive in his pocket like it was a weapon. Inside her living room, Mrs. Callahan's grandson loaded the footage. The screen flickered, black and white, grainy as an old movie reel. At first, it showed nothing but rain-smeared pavement and the glow of headlights. Then, suddenly, another car appeared, pulling slowly from the curb, positioning itself like a chess piece. A pause, then the rush forward. The crash that followed was out of frame, but the intent was there, caught in pixels. Aaron's hand gripped mine so tightly it hurt. "They set us up," he whispered, his voice both horrified and relieved. I swallowed hard. "It looks that way." But relief was not the same as freedom. The image was blurry, the license plate unreadable. The defense would say it proved nothing, that it could be a trick of the rain. Still, it was something, a thread in a storm, a crack in the story that had caged us. When we returned home, David sat at the kitchen table, papers spread like fallen leaves. He looked up, his expression worn but curious. "What did you find?" he asked. I told him. His face shifted, not to hope, not yet, but to something softer than despair. "If this is real," he said, "then maybe you won't have to carry this alone anymore." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the tide could turn. But even as the thought bloomed, I knew the world beyond our door was louder than grainy footage and elderly witnesses. Tomorrow, the reporters would still be there. The lawsuit would still advance. The whispers at church would still sting. But tonight, for the first time since the crash, I let myself imagine a different ending, one where truth, not sacrifice, might decide our fate. And as I turned off the light, I whispered to myself, maybe, just maybe, this storm can be weathered. The next morning, I placed the flash drive on our lawyer's desk like it was a holy relic. Linda Carr leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses, and inserted it into her laptop. Aaron and I sat side by side, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. The footage played, the headlights, the waiting car, the sudden movement. Linda didn't blink. She watched it twice, then a third time, her jaw set tight. When it was over, she folded her hands and stared at us across the desk. "It's something," she said finally. "But it's not enough." Aaron stiffened. "What do you mean it's not enough? You can see it. That car pulled out in front of us. They wanted us to crash." Linda's voice was calm but unyielding. "A jury won't see what you see. It's grainy. The rain obscures the details. No license plate, no clear image of the driver. The other side will argue it's coincidence. And unless we can tie that vehicle to the plaintiff, this is just noise." Her words fell heavy, extinguishing the flicker of hope we had carried from Mrs. Callahan's living room. "But we can find the original," I pressed. "Mrs. Callahan said her grandson installed it. Maybe the company has higher quality footage." Linda tapped her pen against the desk. "That's the right idea. If the manufacturer stores cloud backups, we might retrieve a cleaner version. But understand this, the other side has money. They'll fight to exclude it. They'll say the chain of custody is compromised. We need airtight verification, or it dies before it ever reaches a courtroom." Aaron's hands clenched into fists. "So we're just supposed to wait while they smear her name, while my mom gets crucified for something she didn't even do?" His voice cracked, raw and furious, and for a moment Linda's stern expression softened. "No, we fight, but fights take time and patience." That afternoon, Aaron and I drove back to Mrs. Callahan's. Her grandson dug through settings on his phone, then finally nodded. "Yeah, the system uploads everything to the cloud. Quality's better, but you'll need to contact the company for access. They don't just hand it over." So I did. I spent hours on hold, my ear pressed against the phone, listening to loops of cheerful music that mocked the urgency of my heart. Eventually, a polite voice told me requests for footage required official documentation, subpoenas, or law enforcement involvement. When I relayed that to Linda, she sighed. "I'll file the motion, but it'll take weeks, maybe months. Meanwhile, the media will keep circling." She wasn't exaggerating. That night, the news aired again, this time with an editorial twist. Some neighbors claim there may be video evidence, but experts say nothing yet proves the mother wasn't at fault. My face, my name, my supposed recklessness, all of it broadcast while the truth sat trapped in a server, locked behind procedures and paperwork. Aaron turned off the television with a violent click. They're not even trying to see the truth. They just want a villain. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Let them call me what they want, I said softly. We know what really happened. But even as I said it, I felt the doubt creeping in. What if the footage never surfaced? What if bureaucracy swallowed it whole? What if my sacrifice had already been carved in stone and no amount of truth could erase it? That night, as the rain returned to tap against our windows, I lay awake and thought of storms. Some storms you endure, others you fight. And some you pray have a witness strong enough to prove you were never the one steering into disaster. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where time felt slower, heavier, as if every breath was being measured for truth. I sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly in my lap, my wedding ring pressing into my skin like a reminder of promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Aaron sat in the gallery, his eyes locked on me, the weight of his guilt heavier than any gavel. David sat beside him, stiff in his suit, his arms crossed as though holding the family together with sheer force. The plaintiff's lawyer rose first, a tall man with a voice that filled the room like thunder. He painted me in broad strokes, an aging mother, tired, careless, driving too late at night in conditions she couldn't handle. He spoke of recklessness, of lives put at risk, of a woman too stubborn to admit her limits. Every word carved into me, not because it was true, but because it sounded so believable. Linda stood when it was our turn. She was calm, deliberate, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like punctuation marks. My client is not reckless, she said firmly. She is a mother who has spent her life protecting others. The evidence will show that the accident was not negligence, but something far more deliberate. The judge's eyes narrowed at the phrase, but he allowed her to continue. Then came the exhibits. The plaintiff's side showed photographs of the wreckage, angles chosen carefully to make the impact look as damning as possible. They produced diagrams of the road, expert testimony about braking distances, weather conditions, the dangers of older drivers on slick streets. Each expert nodded solemnly, their authority filling the room like stone walls closing in. Linda objected when they veered into insinuations about my mental clarity, but the judge allowed it. Relevant to capacity, he said, striking the word like a match. By the time the morning recess was called, I felt stripped bare. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as reporters scribbled in their notepads, their pens racing to capture the image of me as the villain. Aaron rushed to my side during the break, his face flushed with anger. They're lying, he hissed. How can they just say those things and everyone nods like it's true? I cupped his cheek with my hand, forcing his eyes to meet mine. Because that's their job. Sweetheart, their job is to make the lie louder than the truth. When the judge returned, Linda played our card, the grainy footage from Mrs. Callahan's porch. The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered on, showing the rainy street, the waiting car, the sudden movement. Gasps rippled through the room. For the first time, doubt entered the air like a draft, but the plaintiff's lawyer rose smoothly, adjusting his tie. Objection, he said. This footage is unreliable. The resolution is poor, the chain of custody questionable, and the angle misleading. Anyone looking at this could interpret it differently. This is not proof, this is speculation. The judge leaned forward, watching the screen again, his expression unreadable. I will allow it, he said finally, but its weight will be determined at trial. Relief fluttered in my chest, but it was fragile. We had bought ourselves a sliver of hope, nothing more. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Microphones thrust forward, cameras clicking like gunfire. Mrs. Hayes, did you stage this evidence? Are you trying to shift blame onto an innocent family? Do you deny being at fault for the accident? I kept my head down, Aaron's arm around me as though he were the parent and I the child. In the crowd, I caught sight of Mrs. Callahan standing a little apart, her cane planted firmly, her chin lifted with defiance. She nodded at me once, a silent vow, "You are not alone." But in that moment, under the glare of the cameras and the crush of voices, I felt every inch the scapegoat they wanted me to be. And I wondered, how many more storms could we withstand before the truth finally broke through? Nights at home had become heavier than days in court. David spoke less and less, his words clipped, practical, as though he were trying to keep the family afloat with lists and ledgers instead of comfort. Aaron paced the house like a prisoner, his guilt gnawing at him until I feared he would explode. One night, I found him at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the blue glow carving shadows under his eyes. His hands hovered over the keyboard. On the screen, I saw the beginning of a confession, typed to the local paper, raw and unfinished. It wasn't my mother driving that night, it was me. "Aaron," I whispered. He slammed the lid shut, his face white with fear and defiance. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. They're tearing you apart, and it's my fault. I have to tell them." I cupped his face in my hands, my voice trembling but firm. "If you tell them, they'll destroy you. They'll see a boy reckless and unfit. They'll brand you before you've had a chance to live. I can survive this, Aaron. You can't, not yet." Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded, swallowing the confession like poison he would have to carry a little longer. The next morning, Linda called with news that shifted the ground beneath us. "The cloud footage came through," she said. "Clearer, you need to see this." At her office, the screen flickered to life. This time, the car across the street was sharp, the license plate visible, the deliberate movement undeniable. It wasn't an accident, it was an ambush, but the revelation went further. Linda leaned forward, her voice low. "The plate matches a vehicle tied to another suspicious claim 2 months ago, same lawyer, same insurance company involved, same pattern of late-night accidents. We may be looking at a ring." I felt my breath catch. Not just carelessness, not just bad luck, a scheme, a trap, and we had been chosen as the easy prey. "They targeted us," I whispered, fury rising like fire through my veins. "They wanted someone ordinary, someone the world would believe was careless." Aaron's fists clenched. "So it was never us, never me, they set us up." Linda nodded grimly. "If we can link these cases together, the narrative changes. But we'll need cooperation from law enforcement. And Margaret, be prepared. Once this goes public, it will get ugly. The people behind this aren't small players. They'll fight." Ugly, the word lingered with me as we drove home. That evening, I watched the news again. My face still filled the screen, the anchor still spoke of negligence. But now, I knew more than they did. I knew the truth was there, waiting, and once revealed, it would cut sharper than any lie. David came into the living room, silent as ever. He stood behind me, his hands on the back of my chair. "If this is real," he said quietly, "then maybe we can finally breathe." I turned to him, searching his eyes for the doubt that had haunted us both. "It's real," I said, "and soon they'll see it." For the first time in weeks, I felt something break through the storm, anger, yes, but also a flicker of strength. They thought they had found their scapegoat. They thought they had chosen the perfect victim. But they had underestimated one thing, a mother's refusal to surrender, not just to lies, but to injustice itself. The scheme was bigger than me, but so was the truth. And truth, once it finds its voice, is impossible to silence. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every whisper rising and falling like waves on the shore. Cameras flashed at the entrance, reporters hunched over their notepads, waiting to capture the moment when my life would be weighed and measured. The prosecutor stood tall, reciting once again the story they had told from the beginning, that I was careless, negligent, guilty. Their words landed like stones. But this time, I did not bow under the weight. I knew something they did not. When Linda rose, the air shifted. She carried with her not just arguments but evidence, hard, undeniable, sharper than doubt. She played the cloud footage, high resolution and unflinching. The other car waited in the dark, headlights glowing like a predator's eyes. Then it pulled forward, deliberate, calculated. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the scene unfolded on the screen. This, Linda said firmly, was no accident. This was entrapment. My client was not reckless. She was targeted. Documents followed, insurance records, suspicious claims, names that appeared again and again. A ring of fraud laid bare in black and white. The jury shifted in their seats. Even the judge's gavel paused midair. The opposing lawyer sputtered objections, but they sounded weak now, hollow against the truth laid bare. When the verdict came, it was clear and strong, not guilty. The plaintiff's claim was dismissed. Investigations would follow for those who had tried to profit from the scheme. In that moment, the weight I had carried for weeks lifted. My son's hand found mine in the gallery, his grip trembling, his eyes brimming with tears. "It's over, Mom," he whispered. David's hand joined ours, the three of us bound together not by fear anymore, but by relief. We had weathered the storm. Outside the courthouse, the cameras flashed again. But this time, the questions were different. How does it feel to be vindicated? What would you say to other families who might be victims of fraud? I answered with the only truth I knew. A mother will do anything to protect her child. But justice must protect us all. That night, as the house settled into silence, I watched Aaron sleep, his face finally peaceful. The burden he had carried was gone, replaced by the fragile beginning of hope. David sat beside me, and for the first time in a long while, we simply held hands without words. The storm had not broken us. It had revealed us, our fears, our flaws, but also our strength. And in the end, the truth had spoken louder than every lie. Dear friends, thank you for staying with me through this story. May it remind us all of the power of family, of sacrifice, and of truth that refuses to be silenced. I wish you and your loved ones health, peace, and happiness. Treasure your families, protect one another, and remember, you are never truly alone in the storm. Until next time, may your homes be safe and your hearts steady.